Imagine this, you're standing in front of a locked door. Behind it is everything you've ever wanted. The career, the confidence, the relationships, the health, the freedom. You can hear it, you can almost see it through the cracks. But the key isn't lost, it's in your pocket, and yet, you don't move. Why? Because you convinced yourself you can't open the door. Most people in this room, right now, are carrying keys they don't use. You have the ability to change your life in ways that would blow your mind, but invisible chains, mental blocks, keep you stuck in the same patterns, the same habits, the same excuses. I've been there. At age 5, I suffered a head injury that left me labeled the boy with the broken brain. I believed I was slow, forgetful, not enough, and for years, I carried that weight. But here's the truth. Your limits are not your life sentence. They are your starting line. Today, I'm going to show you exactly how to break those invisible chains, not someday, but now. We're going to walk through 7 powerful principles to destroy mental blocks and unlock your full potential. So by the end of this talk, you won't just believe you can, you'll know you can. When it comes to overcoming mental blocks, the first step is awareness, and awareness begins with brutal honesty. Most people walk around trapped without even realizing they're in a cage. They've normalized their limitations, turned their excuses into truths, and accepted their self-imposed boundaries as reality. The reason awareness is so powerful is because you cannot fight an enemy you don't see. If you've been procrastinating on that big project, avoiding that hard conversation, or holding yourself back from an opportunity, there's always a reason underneath. And most of the time, it's not the reason you tell yourself on the surface. It's not, I'm too busy. It's not, I don't have the skills yet. It's almost always a deeper, more invisible block like fear of failing, fear of succeeding, perfectionism, or even an identity you've outgrown but still cling to. I once had a client who swore her problem was focus. She told me she couldn't concentrate on anything, especially when something important came up. We dug deeper. I asked her to describe the exact moments she lost focus. She realized it happened right before big opportunities, like pitching her ideas or submitting her work for review. And then it hit her it wasn't about focus at all. It was about fear. Fear that if she actually succeeded, her life would change, and she didn't know if she was ready for that change. Once she became aware of that, the whole game changed. She could now address the real block instead of endlessly chasing productivity hacks that didn't solve the core issue. Awareness is the flashlight in the dark room of your mind. Without it, you're fumbling around, bumping into the same furniture, making the same mistakes, and wondering why nothing changes. With it, you can finally see what's in your way and decide how to move past it. But here's the catch: awareness requires courage. It's not always easy to admit that the thing holding you back isn't your boss, your parents, your schedule, or your circumstances. It's you. It's the stories you tell yourself. It's the beliefs you've carried since childhood that you never stop to question. It's the labels you've accepted because someone else gave them to you, and you thought they were facts. I know this because I lived it. When I was a kid and had my head injury, teachers and other kids called me the boy with the broken brain. I believed them. I accepted that as my identity. I didn't question it. And because I didn't question it, I didn't challenge it. For years, I walked around with that mental label stamped across my forehead. I avoided anything that might prove it wrong, because if I tried and failed, then I would have to face the truth, or what I thought was the truth, that I was broken. But the moment I became aware that the label wasn't reality, it was just a story, I felt this incredible sense of freedom. You can't change what you don't acknowledge, but once you acknowledge it, you can change everything. That's why your first task is to get radically honest about what's holding you back. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't dress it up to make yourself feel better. Write it down in plain words. Maybe it's, I don't believe I'm good enough. Maybe it's, I'm terrified of what people will think. Maybe it's, I only try when I know I can't fail. Whatever it is, shine a light on it. Because the moment you name it, you start to strip it of its power. Think about how you've been living. Are there dreams you've shelved for later that never comes? Are there projects you start but never finish? Are there opportunities you watch pass by while telling yourself, next time? These patterns are clues. Your mental blocks often hide in plain sight inside your habits. Awareness is about noticing these patterns without judgment, just curiosity. You're not attacking yourself, you're investigating yourself. You're saying, isn't interesting. Every time I get close to finishing something important, I suddenly get busy doing unimportant things. Why is that? Here's something powerful your brain can't solve a problem it thinks doesn't exist. If you don't consciously acknowledge your block, your brain will keep operating under the same programming. That's why so many people chase strategies, apps, and tips but stay stuck. They're solving the wrong problem. Imagine a car that keeps stalling, and instead of looking under the hood, you just keep refilling the gas tank. More gas won't fix the engine. Awareness is looking under the hood, and here's the other thing. Awareness doesn't happen by accident. You have to make space for it. In our busy, noisy world, you can go years without ever sitting still long enough to hear your own thoughts clearly. That's why journaling is so powerful. That's why reflection, quiet walks, even meditation work, not because they're magical in themselves, but because they slow you down enough to actually notice what's happening inside your mind. Once you're aware of the block, you can begin to dismantle it. But without awareness, you're swinging in the dark. I'm telling you right now, the first and most life-changing thing you can do after this talk is to take out a notebook and answer this question. What's the real reason I'm not moving forward? Right until you get past the surface answers and down to the truth. It might hurt. It might shock you. It might even make you angry. That's good. That's movement. That's the sound of chains rattling before they break. I want you to understand this. Awareness is not weakness. It's the ultimate strength. The bravest thing you can do is admit to yourself, this is the thing that's been holding me back. Because once you see it, you can face it. And once you face it, you can beat it. You're no longer running from shadows. You're walking straight toward the light. And that's how every single breakthrough starts. So here's your challenge. Before you go to bed tonight, write down your biggest mental block. Name it, own it. Tell the truth, even if it's uncomfortable. That truth is the first swing of the hammer that's going to shatter the wall in front of you. And when that wall starts to crack, you're going to realize something extraordinary. The door to your best life was never locked. It was waiting for you to open it. The second step in overcoming mental blocks is rewriting the story you tell yourself, because every belief, every limitation, every ceiling you feel pressing down on you comes from a narrative that has been repeated so many times it feels like truth. Human beings live in stories. We explain our lives through them, justify our actions with them, and filter our possibilities based on them. The danger is that most of these stories were never consciously chosen. They were handed to us by parents, teachers, culture, experiences, and sometimes even single moments of failure or embarrassment that left a lasting mark. Over time, the brain begins to mistake repetition for reality. And before long, you aren't living your life, you're living your script. When I was a child, after my head injury, the script handed to me was very clear. You're the boy with the broken brain. It wasn't said once. It was said in different ways by different people over and over, until it was the lens through which I saw everything. Every bad grade was proof. Every slow moment in class reinforced it. Every time I avoided speaking up, I told myself it was because of my broken brain. That story became my shield, an excuse I could use to avoid trying. But it was also my prison. It kept me from taking risks. It convinced me I couldn't improve. And here's the truth. As long as you keep living inside an old, limiting story, no amount of advice, tools, or strategies will create lasting change, because you'll sabotage yourself to stay consistent with the identity you believe is real. The shift began for me when I realized that my story wasn't an unchangeable fact. It was just a version of events I'd accepted. What if I could create a new version? What if I could tell myself a story that empowered me instead of trapping me? I didn't go from broken brain to genius overnight, but I did start saying, I have an upgraded brain, I just need to learn how to use it. That small but powerful change began to open doors in my mind. When I told myself I had an upgraded brain, I began to act like someone who was capable of learning. I started picking up books again, first painfully slow, then faster. I took memory challenges. I stepped into rooms where I once felt small. My life began to bend in the direction of my new story. This is why changing your self-story is so crucial. Your brain craves alignment between what you believe about yourself and how you behave. If your story is, I'm not disciplined, your brain will find ways to make you inconsistent, even if you try to follow a plan. If your story is, I'm shy, you'll avoid speaking up in meetings, even when you have a brilliant idea. The reverse is also true. Change the story, and the behavior will follow. You don't need perfect confidence to start. You need a believable, upgraded version of your story that you can start living into. This process starts with awareness. Pay attention to how you talk to yourself. Listen for sentences that begin with I am, not, or I can't. These are identity statements, and they're some of the most powerful clues to the story you're living. Once you've identified one, ask yourself where it came from. Did you choose it, or did it choose you? Is it a reflection of your current reality, or is it a leftover from an old experience? Then challenge it. Just because something was true in the past doesn't mean it's a permanent fact about you. I once worked with a young woman who told me, I'm terrible at public speaking. I freeze up every time. When we traced the story back, it came from a moment in high school when she forgot her lines in a play. One moment. One experience had defined her self-image for over a decade. I asked her to reframe the story. I'm becoming a confident speaker. This wasn't delusional. It was a small shift that kept the door open for growth. Within months of practicing and leaning into that story, She gave her first successful presentation at work. The story changed, and the results followed. The key is to rewrite your story in a way that feels possible but stretches you. If you currently think, I'm bad with money, you don't need to jump to, I'm a financial genius. That leap will feel fake to your brain. Instead, try, I'm learning to manage my money better every month. It's believable, and it invites you to take action to make it true. Over time, as your actions accumulate, your story can evolve again. You also have to guard your new story fiercely. That means surrounding yourself with people and environments that reinforce it. If you're trying to see yourself as capable, but you spend all your time with people who constantly point out your weaknesses, you'll be pulled back into the old narrative. Choose influences that speak to your potential. Read books, listen to podcasts, and seek out mentors who embody the kind of story you want to live. Rewriting your story is not about pretending bad things never happened. It's about refusing to let those moments define the rest of your life. You can acknowledge past mistakes or struggles without making them the headline of your identity. Yes, you may have failed before, but that doesn't make you a failure. It makes you someone who's learning and adapting. Yes, you may have been shy before, but that doesn't mean you're doomed to silence forever. Your past is a chapter, not the whole book. The moment you realize you are the author, not just the character, everything changes. You start to see that your story is flexible. You can introduce new plot twists, you can shift the tone, you can give yourself a comeback. And the best part, the brain will adapt to match the story you tell it. Neuroplasticity works in your favor. You can literally rewire your mind by repeatedly feeding it a new narrative and backing it up with aligned action. Here's your challenge. Pick one story you've been telling yourself that limits you. Write it down exactly as you've been thinking it. Then, rewrite it into a growth-oriented version you can believe in. Say it out loud every morning. Post it somewhere you'll see it throughout the day. And most importantly, act in ways that make the new story real. It might feel strange at first, but with repetition, you'll start to notice a shift, not just in how you think, but in what you do. Your mental blocks aren't just about skills or circumstances. They're about the narrative that shapes your reality. Change the story, and you change the lens through which you see the world. Change the lens, and you change the choices you make. Change the choices, and you change your life. The story you choose today will become the life you live tomorrow, so choose wisely, because the pen is already in your hand. Big goals can feel like standing at the bottom of a mountain, staring at the summit while your mind whispers all the reasons you'll never make it. That's the trap mental blocks create. They make the distance between where you are and where you want to be seem impossibly wide. You start thinking you have to leap to the top in one massive jump, and when that's obviously unrealistic, you freeze. The truth is, no one gets to the top in one jump. You climb it step by step, and in life those steps are what I call micro wins. Micro wins are the small, achievable actions that build momentum. Momentum is the antidote to mental paralysis, because once you're moving, the block begins to lose its hold on you. I know this from personal experience. After my brain injury, reading a whole book felt impossible. I'd stare at the first page and feel my brain shutting down before I even began. If I had waited until I felt ready to read an entire book, I'd still be waiting. So I started smaller, 1 page a day. That was it, just 1 page. Some days I'd get into a rhythm and read more. But the commitment was always small enough that my brain couldn't talk me out of it. That tiny step built confidence. A week later, 1 page turned into 2. Eventually, I was reading entire books, but I never would have gotten there without those micro wins stacking up. The problem with big goals is they tend to trigger fear and perfectionism. When your brain senses something big and uncertain, it floods you with resistance. That resistance is your mind's way of protecting you from failure, embarrassment, or discomfort. But when you shrink the goal into something so small it feels laughable, that fear doesn't get triggered. Your mind thinks, well, I can do that. That's nothing. And once you take that small action, you create a sense of progress. And progress fuels motivation. Motivation isn't something you wait for. It's something you generate through action. Think about someone who wants to get in shape, but hasn't worked out in years. If they commit to running 5 miles a day, the odds of following through are slim. Their body isn't ready, and their mind is already looking for an exit. But if they commit to walking for 5 minutes a day, there's no resistance. They can do it easily. And once they do it, they often end up doing more without forcing themselves. That's the power of micro wins. They lower the barrier to entry and get you moving. I once worked with an entrepreneur who wanted to launch a new business but kept procrastinating. She had this huge list of tasks: market research, branding, website development, networking, and the sheer weight of it kept her stuck. We broke it down to the smallest possible win. Sending one introductory email to a potential client, that was it. She did it, and it gave her a sense of accomplishment. The next day, she sent 2 emails. By the end of the week, she had her first meeting scheduled. The big, overwhelming project started to feel doable because She focused on the smallest step forward. Micro wins work because they bypass the perfectionist part of your brain. When you set massive, all or nothing goals, your brain focuses on the risk of failing and decides it's safer not to start. But when the step is so small you can't fail, you just do it. And in doing it, you build trust with yourself. Self-trust is one of the most important weapons against mental blocks. Every time you follow through on a micro commitment, you're sending your brain proof. I keep my promises to myself. Over time, that proof changes your identity. You start to see yourself as someone who takes action. And that identity is what eventually carries you to the big wins. Another benefit of micro wins is that they create momentum in the face of uncertainty. Mental blocks often come from overthinking, waiting until you have all the answers before you act. But the truth is, clarity comes from action, not from sitting and thinking about action. When you take a small step, you get new information, feedback, and experience that guide your next move. Without that step, you stay stuck in analysis paralysis. This is why I tell people to focus on minimum viable actions. If you want to write a book, your minimum viable action might be writing 1 sentence a day. If you want to learn a new language, it might be learning 1 word a day. If you want to start exercising, it might be doing 1 push-up. It sounds too small to matter, but over time, these tiny steps create massive change. A single drop of water doesn't fill a bucket, but consistent drops over time will. To make micro wins work for you, start by identifying the area where you feel blocked. Then ask yourself, what's the smallest possible step I can take toward this goal that requires almost no effort? Once you know it, commit to it daily, no matter what. It's important to make the step so small that you can't give yourself an excuse not to do it. If you feel like you can't keep it up for a year, it's too big, shrink it until it feels effortless. The magic happens when these small steps start compounding. At first, it's about building the habit of movement. Later, it's about building momentum that makes bigger steps feel natural. You'll reach a point where the action you once thought was huge becomes your new normal. That's when you realize you've climbed halfway up the mountain without even noticing. I challenge you to pick one goal you've been avoiding because it feels too big and break it into a micro win you can start today. Make it so easy you can't say no and commit to it for the next 7 days. At the end of the week, notice how you feel. You'll find that the block you thought was immovable has already started to weaken, not because you took a giant leap, but because you took the first step and kept going. Mental blocks are like walls in your mind, and micro wins are the cracks in those walls. Every small action is a swing of the hammer. Alone, each swing might not look like much, but together they bring the wall down. The moment you understand that progress is built on consistency, not intensity, you stop waiting for perfect conditions and start creating momentum now. That's how you turn impossible mountains into manageable climbs, one micro win at a time. Your environment is either pulling you forward or holding you back, and most people underestimate just how much influence it has on their thoughts, emotions, and actions. You cannot expect to think like a champion while living in an environment that constantly feeds you negativity, distraction, and low energy. Your surroundings are not neutral. They are shaping you, whether you notice it or not. If you've ever felt motivated after visiting a beautiful space, inspired after talking with an uplifting friend, or drained after spending time in a messy, noisy room, you've experienced the power of environment firsthand. Mental blocks often thrive in environments that reinforce them. If your goal is to focus, but your workspace is cluttered, noisy, and full of distractions, you are setting yourself up for frustration. If you're trying to feel more optimistic, but you spend your evenings around people who complain about everything, your mindset will mirror theirs. The mind is incredibly adaptive. It will absorb whatever it's surrounded by. The problem is that we often adapt unconsciously, not realizing our environment is quietly programming us. I once worked with a CEO who came to me saying he felt creatively stuck. He was frustrated that no matter how much he tried to brainstorm, no new ideas were coming. When I visited his office, I understood immediately. It was dimly lit, with piles of paperwork, no personal touches, and a constant hum of background noise from the open-plan floor outside. The environment screamed stress and disorganization. We made a few changes, added better lighting, introduced plants for a sense of freshness, cleared the clutter, and created a quiet zone for focused work. Within weeks, his creativity returned, and he was producing ideas that had been buried under months of mental fog. His block didn't come from a lack of talent. It came from an environment that wasn't allowing his brain to thrive. Changing your environment doesn't always mean moving to a new city or building a brand new office. Often, it's about small, intentional adjustments that signal to your brain, this is a space for growth. That could mean clearing your desk at the end of each day so you start fresh in the morning. Replacing the news you listen to during breakfast with an educational podcast, or spending more time in places that make you feel inspired, like libraries, parks, or art galleries. Your environment is also made up of the people you surround yourself with. If your inner circle normalizes mediocrity, excuses, and inaction, you will unconsciously adopt those same behaviors. This isn't about cutting people out of your life completely, but it is about being mindful of who has the loudest voice in your ear. If you want to think bigger, spend time with people who challenge you to grow. If you want to break through a block, seek out people who have already overcome something similar. They'll give you perspective and proof that it's possible. One of the fastest ways to change your environment is to audit it for triggers. Ask yourself, what in my surroundings reinforces my current block? If your block is procrastination, maybe your workspace has too many distractions, a TV nearby, notifications constantly pinging, or a phone sitting on your desk begging for attention. If your block is self-doubt, maybe you're spending too much time on social media comparing yourself to others. Identify these triggers and either remove them or replace them with cues that support the mindset you want. When I started changing my own environment after my injury, I noticed subtle but powerful shifts. I stopped doing homework in front of the television and created a quiet corner for studying. I placed books in visible spots around my room to remind myself to read. I even changed the background on my computer to something inspiring rather than neutral. These small tweaks created a space that encouraged learning, and over time, that environment trained my brain to expect focus and growth when I was in it. Another important aspect of environment is routine. Even if you can't physically change your surroundings much, you can create rituals that change how you experience them. For example, you might light a candle before you start work, put on a specific playlist that helps you concentrate, or stand up and stretch every hour to reset your body and mind. These routines act as environmental anchors. They tell your brain, it's time to switch into a different mode now. Some people think they have to wait until they feel motivated to act, but the reverse is often true. Changing your environment creates the motivation. If you walk into a clean, lit space with everything you need to get started, you feel an immediate urge to be productive. If you walk into a cluttered, chaotic space, your brain feels overwhelmed before you've even begun. The same is true socially. If you're around people who are taking action, you naturally feel more inclined to act yourself. I challenge you to run a 7-day environment experiment. Pick one mental block you've been struggling with and make 3 small environmental changes designed to counter it. If you can't focus, declutter your desk. Silence unnecessary notifications and work near natural light. If you lack motivation, put up visual reminders of your goals, schedule work sessions with an accountability partner, and place tools for your task where you can see them. Track how you feel and what you accomplish each day. You'll be surprised at how much shifts when you stop fighting your environment and start letting it work for you. Mental blocks often feel like they're happening entirely inside your head, but they are constantly being fed or starved by what's around you. Your environment can either reinforce your limits or dissolve them. The key is to stop leaving it to chance. Design it with the same intentionality you'd use to train your body, build your skills, or manage your time. When you do, you'll find that what once felt like an immovable mental wall starts to crumble simply because the world around you is no longer holding it up. And once you experience that, you'll understand why changing your environment isn't just a nice idea. It's one of the most practical, powerful tools you have for breaking free. Your brain is like a muscle. And mental blocks are often the result of it being out of shape in specific areas. Just like you wouldn't expect to run a marathon without training, you can't expect your mind to operate at its peak without consistent mental exercise. Too many people believe their intelligence, creativity, or memory is fixed. But science shows otherwise. Your brain is highly adaptable through neuroplasticity, which means it can grow stronger and more flexible with the right kind of training. The trouble is, most people feed their brain information passively, scrolling through social media or listening to conversations, and then wonder why they feel foggy, uninspired, or stuck. One of the simplest but most powerful ways to overcome a mental block is to give your brain intentional challenges that stretch it just beyond its comfort zone. When you do this, you force your brain to form new connections, strengthen existing ones, and improve its processing speed. Think of it like upgrading your mental operating system. You're installing new capabilities that make it easier to think clearly and solve problems. This can be as simple as learning a new language, practicing memory exercises, solving puzzles, or reading books outside your usual interests. The goal is to deliberately expose yourself to tasks that make your brain work a little harder than it's used to. I remember working with a young man who was convinced he wasn't smart enough to pursue his dream career in technology. He struggled to keep up in class and felt mentally blocked whenever he tried to learn new coding languages. Instead of telling him to study harder, I gave him a program of daily mental exercises, things like memorizing short sequences of numbers, practicing speed reading, and learning 5 new words in a foreign language each day. At first, it felt unrelated to his coding goals, but after a few weeks, he noticed something incredible. The mental fog he'd been feeling began to lift, and he could focus longer, grasp new concepts faster, and retain more of what he learned. Strengthening his brain in one area unlocked abilities in another, and within months, he had the confidence and skill to excel in his tech program. The same principle applies to creativity. If you feel stuck in your thinking, it's not always because the problem is too hard. It might be because you've been using the same mental pathways for too long. The brain loves efficiency, so it defaults to familiar patterns, but those patterns can also limit you. By training your brain to approach problems from different angles, you break out of those ruts. You could try drawing with your non-dominant hand, brainstorming 20 unusual solutions to a simple problem, or explaining a concept you know well to a child. These activities force your mind to adapt and think in new ways. Mental exercise is not just about problem solving, it's about energy management too. The brain consumes a significant portion of the body's energy, and just like your muscles, it needs recovery time to perform at its best. That's why balancing intense mental work with rest is critical. Short breaks, meditation, and even daydreaming can help consolidate learning and refresh your focus. Many people make the mistake of thinking they can push through a block by sheer willpower, but often, the fastest way forward is to give the brain a chance to reset before coming back with renewed clarity. A powerful part of mental training is visualization. Olympic athletes use this all the time. They mentally rehearse their routines, imagining every movement in detail. Because the brain doesn't fully distinguish between imagined and real experiences, you can do the same with your own goals. If you're stuck on writing a report, visualize yourself completing it smoothly, feeling the satisfaction of finishing, and receiving positive feedback. This primes your brain to create the state and actions necessary for success, reducing the resistance that fuels mental blocks. Another element of training your brain is improving your input. Just as you can't expect your body to thrive on junk food, you can't expect your brain to thrive on junk information. What you read, watch, and listen to is the mental diet you're feeding yourself. If you constantly consume low-quality, negative, or shallow content, you're programming your mind to operate at that level. But if you surround yourself with inspiring stories, high-level conversations, and deep learning materials, you train your brain to think more deeply and optimistically. One small habit that can make a massive difference is reading at least 10 pages of a high-quality book every day. Over time, those ideas accumulate and give your mind new tools to work with when you commit to training your brain regularly. You'll notice your mental blocks start to dissolve not because the problems went away, but because you became stronger than the blocks. Instead of avoiding challenges, you'll lean into them because your brain is conditioned to find solutions. And this is the real power of brain training. It doesn't just help you in the area you're working on. It builds a mental resilience that carries over into every aspect of your life. Here's the challenge I want to leave you with for the next 30 days. Set aside just 15 minutes a day for deliberate brain training. Pick one activity that stretches you, a puzzle, a new skill, a memory challenge, or speed reading, and stick with it daily. Keep a small journal to track how your thinking feels over time. You'll be amazed at how, in just 1 month, the mental fog begins to lift, your focus sharpens, and problems that once felt heavy now feel manageable. Mental blocks often feel like walls, but most of the time they're just signals that your brain is asking for new stimulation. When you feed it challenges, nourish it with quality input, and give it time to recover, those walls turn into stepping stones. You stop being intimidated by obstacles and start being curious about them. That shift in mindset, from fear to curiosity, is what turns mental blocks from roadblocks into gateways. And once you train your brain to work with you, instead of against you, there's no limit to what you can achieve. One of the most underestimated causes of mental blocks is emotional clutter. People often think their lack of focus or creativity is purely a mental problem, but in reality, unprocessed emotions take up space in the mind like too many tabs open on a computer. It's hard to think clearly or take decisive action when a part of your mental energy is constantly being drained by unresolved frustration, fear, guilt, or resentment. Your brain is powerful, but it's not designed to thrive in an environment that's emotionally overloaded. Clearing that emotional clutter is not just about feeling better, it's about reclaiming mental bandwidth so you can think faster, focus deeper, and create more freely. Think about the last time you tried to work on an important task while you were upset about something. Maybe you had an argument that morning, or you were stressed about an upcoming deadline, or you were still replaying a past failure in your head. Even if you sat down and forced yourself to work, your brain kept drifting back to that emotional noise. It's like trying to run a marathon with a backpack full of bricks. You can move forward, but it's exhausting and far slower than it needs to be. If you've been struggling with a mental block for days or even weeks, there's a good chance it's not just about lack of skill or knowledge. It's about the emotional weight you're carrying. I once worked with a writer who had been staring at a blank page for over a month. She thought she had writer's block because she couldn't find the right words. But when we dug deeper, we discovered she was still hurt from a harsh review she had received on her last project. Every time she tried to write, a voice in her head whispered, "What if they hate this too?" That emotional wound left unacknowledged was hijacking her creative process. The solution wasn't more research or writing tips. It was giving herself permission to feel the sting of that criticism, acknowledge it for what it was, and then consciously release it. Once she did, the words began to flow again. One powerful method to clear emotional clutter is the process of name it to tame it. Neuroscientists have found that simply labeling your emotions reduces their intensity. When you pause and say, "I am feeling anxious," or "I'm feeling frustrated," your brain moves that emotion from the limbic system, where it's reactive, to the prefrontal cortex, where it's more manageable. This doesn't make the feeling disappear instantly, but it creates enough mental distance for you to think clearly about what to do next. Another strategy is journaling, not the kind where you just record your day, but the kind where you dump every thought and emotion onto the page without judgment. Think of it as an emotional detox. You don't have to keep what you write. In fact, you can tear it up afterward if you want. The point is to get those thoughts out of your head and onto paper so they're no longer swirling in your mental space. When you free up that space, you give your brain more room for problem solving and creativity. Forgiveness is also a surprisingly powerful tool for breaking through mental blocks. Holding on to anger or resentment is like keeping an unpaid tenant in your mental apartment. They take up space without contributing anything good. Forgiving doesn't mean you're saying what happened was okay. It means you're choosing to stop letting it drain your energy. Even self-forgiveness plays a massive role here. Many people are blocked because they're punishing themselves for past mistakes, consciously or unconsciously. Letting go of that internal grudge opens the door to progress. Sometimes, clearing emotional clutter means having difficult conversations. If something someone said is bothering you, addressing it respectfully can release a huge amount of mental tension. The longer you avoid it, the more space it takes up in your mind. I've seen people unblock themselves in a single day just because they finally expressed something they'd been holding in for months. Of course, not all emotional clutter comes from the past. Some of it comes from the environment you're right now. If you're constantly surrounded by negativity, criticism, or chaos, it's like trying to focus in the middle of a storm. You might need to set boundaries with certain people, adjust your work environment, or limit your exposure to negative news and social media. The cleaner your emotional environment, the freer your mind becomes. Clearing emotional clutter is not a one-time task. It's an ongoing practice. Just like you wouldn't clean your house once and expect it to stay spotless forever, you can't expect your emotional space to stay clear without regular maintenance. That means checking in with yourself daily, noticing when you feel weighed down, and taking proactive steps to address it. It means recognizing when you're carrying something that's not yours to carry and putting it down before it consumes your energy. Here's your challenge for the next week. Spend 5 minutes at the end of each day identifying any emotions that feel heavy. Write them down, name them out loud, or talk them through with someone you trust. Then consciously choose a release method. Maybe it's journaling, meditating, exercising, or even just taking a few deep breaths while visualizing the feeling leaving your body. Track how your focus and clarity improve over those 7 days. When you learn to clear emotional clutter, you stop letting past pain, present stress, or imagined fears dictate your mental state. You create space for new ideas, new solutions, and new opportunities to come in. And in that space, you'll find not just the end of mental blocks, but the beginning of a mind that's free to operate at its full power. One of the most overlooked yet powerful ways to overcome mental blocks is to step into a state of constant curiosity and lifelong learning. When your brain is stuck, it's often because it has settled into a fixed loop, replaying the same thoughts, habits, and approaches over and over again. Curiosity disrupts that loop. It forces the mind to open new pathways, to see possibilities where before there were only dead ends. The moment you shift from "I already know" to "I wonder what else is possible," you invite your brain to search for solutions instead of excuses. This shift doesn't just break through mental blocks, it rewires the way you approach challenges for the rest of your life. Curiosity is powerful because it turns obstacles into experiments. Instead of seeing a problem as a wall, you start asking questions like, "What's behind this? What if I approached it differently? What can I learn from this?" That questioning activates the brain's reward system because humans are naturally wired to seek answers. The dopamine hit you get from discovering something new fuels motivation, and motivation is often the exact energy you need to push through a mental block. I remember speaking with an entrepreneur who had been paralyzed for months, trying to decide the direction of her business. She kept saying, "I don't know the right answer, and I can't move until I do." The problem was she was waiting for certainty before taking action. I encouraged her to flip the script. Instead of asking, What's the right answer? I told her to ask, what's one small thing I can try today to learn more? That small shift moved her from paralysis to experimentation. Within weeks, she had tested multiple ideas, gathered feedback, and gained the clarity she'd been waiting for. The block wasn't solved by thinking harder, it was solved by staying curious and taking small learning-driven steps. Children are masters at this. They're not afraid to fail because failure to them is just information. They ask hundreds of questions a day, not because they expect all the answers immediately, but because they know that curiosity itself is rewarding. Somewhere along the way, many of us lose that natural curiosity because we start fearing mistakes, judgment, or wasted effort. But the truth is, curiosity makes mistakes less scary because it reframes them as part of the process. Every wrong turn is simply one more piece of data helping you find the right path. A practical way to spark curiosity when you're stuck is to deliberately expose yourself to new environments, people, and ideas. If you've been staring at the same problem in the same workspace for days, get out. Go to a bookstore and read about a completely unrelated field. Talk to someone from a different industry. Take a walk in a place you've never been before. Your brain thrives on novelty, and new input often triggers connections you couldn't see before. Sometimes the breakthrough you need comes not from thinking about the problem directly, but from seeing something in a totally different context that sparks a new perspective. Another strategy is to ask better questions. Most people stuck in a mental block are asking limiting questions like, why can't I figure this out? Which focuses the brain on reasons for failure. Replace those with expansive questions like, what haven't I tried yet? Who could I learn from? What's the simplest version of this I could test today? These questions open your brain instead of shutting it down. Your mind is a search engine. It will find answers to whatever you ask it, so ask questions worth answering. It's also essential to create a learning habit. Commit to feeding your brain new information daily, even if it's just 10 minutes. Read a chapter of a book, listen to a podcast, watch a talk, take an online course. The more diverse your knowledge, the more raw material your brain has to make connections. This isn't just about gaining skills. It's about building a mind that's flexible, adaptable, and ready to approach problems from multiple angles. That adaptability is the enemy of mental blocks because it ensures you're never stuck with only one way forward. Curiosity also thrives in collaboration. When you bring your stuck problem to a group and invite different perspectives, you often find someone else has already solved a similar issue, or they see an angle you never considered. Being open to learning from others doesn't just give you answers. It trains your brain to value input over ego. This humility is key because ego is one of the biggest block builders. It resists change and clings to what's familiar. Curiosity breaks ego's grip. Here's your challenge the next time you feel stuck. Instead of forcing yourself to come up with a complete solution, commit to becoming a detective for 24 hours. Your only job is to gather clues. Ask 5 new questions about the problem. Seek out 2 completely different perspectives. Try one tiny, low-risk experiment. At the end of those 24 hours, notice how much more possibility your brain sees compared to when you started. You may not have the full solution yet, but you'll have momentum, and momentum is the beginning of every breakthrough. When you live with curiosity and a commitment to learning, mental blocks stop being dead ends and become detours, opportunities to discover something you didn't know before. You stop waiting for perfect clarity before moving and start creating clarity through action. And perhaps most importantly, you develop a brain that sees every challenge as an invitation to grow. That kind of mind doesn't just overcome mental blocks, it turns them into fuel. When curiosity becomes your default mode, there's no situation too complex, no obstacle too heavy, and no block too stubborn to withstand the relentless energy of a mind that refuses to stop asking, what else is possible?